Then we have Dr. Alphonse Guza, who is the Chief of Party for a water towers project working through C4, but working for U.S. Forest Service. And then we have George Minor, is the Africa Fisheries Strategy Manager with TNC. As they come to present, they will have to remind you of the name so that when you have questions, you will have to direct the questions to the individuals. But with them, we have a number of others who will be helping with answering questions related to various topics. Okay. We have, of course, Anastasia from Regional Center, and also Ken Mubea seated there. Can I please ask you to come this way, please? Okay. May I therefore take this opportunity to introduce Robinson to make his presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Enoch, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Robinson from the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, and I'll be taking you through a couple of slides on information decision support tools for evidence-based landscape management. So the Regional Center is somewhere on Thika Road on your way to Kasarani, just for those of us who might not have that context. And we are glad to be here. Yeah, I hope my slides will play correctly. Thank you. I want to speak a little bit about why we are doing what we are doing and the partnerships, and we'll probably, in the interest of time, skip the demo. But just to start us off, like I mentioned, we are from the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. We are an intergovernmental body working with like 20 member states in the region, but also with a strong partnership with some of our colleagues on this bench, and also with a strong partnership with USAID and NASA on some of the work that we'll be speaking about in the next couple of slides. And I think this has already been spoken about on a number of sessions in this conference, that the region that we are in currently has a lot of growth, both population-wise, infrastructure, and all manner of growth and development-related aspects. We see a lot of that growth centralized around urban areas. The map to your right would be like a density or population density map, and the light colors are areas that are seeing a lot of population increase in those areas. The region around Lake Victoria Basin, of course, is very conspicuous, and the region around Ethiopia is also very conspicuous. So a lot of the population that we are talking about, these are young people, energetic people, and we need to really think what their future is going to be if they are going to base their future livelihoods on the landscapes that we are also, and the natural resources that we are talking about. I want to highlight briefly that we have a partnership with USAID, that's the Regional Center, and NASA, on a partnership that is working on looking at how best we can use Earth observation and geospatial tools to support development decision making. So how can we contribute to the debate about landscape restoration, the demand for resources, by creating tools that respond to the demand for information to really address the information gaps that are coming our way as a result of the intensive use of our natural resources. That partnership is known as SEVERE, and SEVERE is working in a number of areas in different parts of the globe. We in Eastern Africa, we represent the hub known as the SEVERE Eastern and Southern Africa at the regional center, that's at RCMRD. And the collaboration with NASA, for instance, brings on board access to technology and resources where we have access to data and technology from a number of Earth-observing satellites. And we try and ask ourselves, what is it that we can do with the data and information to address issues to do with agriculture and food security, issues to do with land use and land cover change, issues to do with water and related disasters, and all those issues that relate to landscape changes and restoration. And our ultimate goal is actually to think about how best can we make advantage of the existing Earth observation data so that we move the conversation from just data and access of data to information, and that information can be actioned for decision making. It could be landscape restoration, it could be disasters and saving lives, it could be a whole range of other decisions that our policymakers or management level decision makers need to make to address some of the issues that we are talking about in this meeting. And we probably might think that just the access to data in itself is enough, but you might realize that access to data in itself is not the ultimate solution. You'll have other issues around decision-making that emanate from the capacity of those who are using the data, the stakeholders around the issues like landscape ecology that we are talking about, the partnerships that we need to create. And this whole range of issues bring around a conversation that we need to have about making sure that what we create can be effectively assimilated and used by decision makers in an environment that the capacity for them to assimilate that information is enhanced. So we think of ourselves as service providers and information and data and information service providers, and we try and work through some of the problem issues that we have through, we try and make sure that we understand the context. We try and make sure that we understand the players, the stakeholders around that, and some of them are here with us on this panel. We try and ensure that we design something that the stakeholder or the decision maker will find value in, and ultimately also we try and monitor that process. This is just a representation of some of the issues that we are working on. Of course, you will understand that landscape restoration and landscape issues will cut across a number of some of these 4 areas that we have highlighted. So I just want to highlight a couple of examples with what we are doing with some of the partners we have here in terms of the use of Earth observation and geoinformation services to support the work that they are doing either with communities or with other institutions in terms of development decision making. And because I didn't want to speak alone in this meeting, you will allow me to donate one of my minutes to her.
These are some of the ways we are using as NRT to control the spread of acacia reficiens, which is taking over grazing areas. The first one is cutting, just manual cutting of the tree, and through that more grass is able to grow, and that means livestock have more pasture. The second one is bunching. Bunching is putting livestock together and grazing them in an area in a rotational way. And through this, livestock hooves are able to open up the soil and allow water to penetrate, and also the dung and the urine will be able to make the soil more productive. The third one is reseeding. That means reintroducing the grass species into the areas where we no longer have grass. And this will mean more grass for livestock and better quality livestock which can be taken to market. And plant grazing ensures that grass are not overused, and that means they are able to grow to a stage where they can be able to produce seeds, which now ensures continuous growth of grass, and that means more grass for livestock.
If you allow me, I will just play one more.
These are acacia refuges, and we consider them, they are not useful to this community at all, because for one, they take over an area, they colonize, and no any other vegetation which will grow, because actually they do well in dry soils. Their roots are very strong, they can go deep, and once the area is bare, they just take over. Gullies like this start coming up. You see even the roots are coming out, and actually it's not supporting any life here. And we consider them bad or not harmful because livestock do not feed on them, even wildlife, and there's no any other economic use in the community. After these plants colonizing this area, they have displaced some other useful plants which have even medicinal value. So the community is feeling that actually it's a bad tree within this area. We believe actually what led this the spread of this acacia is poor land use. People using land poorly, they graze anyhow without plan, they settle anywhere without plan. But we are trying now to train the community and do intensive training on awareness about plant grazing, to tell them the importance of doing plant grazing, the importance of doing or arranging settlements in order. So we are trying our best, and actually it's rolling out, and there's a lot of improvement since 2012, because that's when we started regular trainings on plant grazing, although the Conservancy started doing some clearing back 2006.
So I think they have done a good job, a better job than I would have done in introducing the issue of invasive species, which we are trying to support by creating information and trying to create tools that can support their efforts to collect data and understand how best to improve or to mitigate against the spread of invasive species. We've worked with some Earth observation data to try and create a tool that's online, that can be accessed online. But this tool brings on board NDVI values and other ancillary data that would support decision making. NDVI is basically the greenness index. But with invasive species, you understand that you tend to see a lot of greenness when you look at the landscape from a satellite perspective. Some of that greenness is not really palatable to the animals, like you saw in the clips. And so we are trying to work with some of our partners here on the Conservancies to support data collection. We have come up with, worked with them to create an app that they can use in the field to be able to collect the data. That data can be assimilated into our servers and can be used to model and generate these kind of maps. These kind of maps are important in terms of showing the extent and coverage of the invasive species, and that can also be useful in terms of estimating the cost. If in the event that, for instance, the county government wants to estimate how much it would take to eradicate using either of the methods, biological, mechanical, or wherever, then they would have a good beginning point to start, and we can always go back and replow the data into the models and understand whether the efforts have borne fruit in terms of mitigation. I think I'll leave my friend Alphonse to speak a little bit on this particular work that we were doing with the Kenya Water Towers and the mapping of the landscapes at the water towers in Kenya, a very hot topic and subject now because he's better qualified than me to speak about that. I'll leave that slide. I just want to highlight a few other things on where we are supporting agriculture and food security documentation and efforts to understand where are the cropping zones in this country, what are we growing in those particular areas, and in those efforts, if we wanted to advise or speak to the government agencies and say, these are the areas where you're growing corn, and in these climatic conditions that we have experienced, maybe in this year, maize is not likely to do very well. The government would have almost like information at their fingertips to understand the crop from Kitale in these particular areas is not going to do well because of ABCD. So we've been doing that with the Ministry of Agriculture, and the ultimate product is like what we call a crop conditions and early warning system that would support, has input also from field officers, where we are likely to see almost on a monthly basis the updates to the policymaker level that these are the crop conditions, and you can see exactly which crops are likely to be impacted in which areas. So you can quickly make decisions on what's likely to be the food security situation in the next couple of months. We, in terms of a landscape approach, of course, in some of the arid areas that you're seeing, also water is a key issue. We are trying to use satellite data and support the communities in terms of identification and monitoring the expanse of the small water ponds. These are very, very important for livelihoods in the rangelands and arid and semi-arid areas. So if you can be able to show and monitor how the water in the small water ponds is changing over time, then you are able to make decisions such as how do you redirect the grazing plans and the grazing patterns? Our friend from the Conservancy might touch on that a little bit, but this is also another way that you could support the planning aspects from an imagery and remote sensing and GIS perspective. Again, flooding, this is an issue that causes a lot of losses to some of the landscapes that we are looking at, either in terms of soil erosion, washing away people's infrastructure and homes. We've been working with the Ministry of, that was the Ministry of Lands and Environment, to try and, like in the Nzoia Basin, address how high should the dikes be to ensure that in the event of a flood, you have a threshold value that can determine certain people are not going to be impacted, or this level of infrastructure cannot be affected in the event that you have a 1 or 2 meter high flood. So we are working on hydrological models to generate this information and share it again with government agencies. Last but not least, in terms of climate vulnerability, you have all this information coming up about climate change, but the key questions maybe from a decision maker is who is vulnerable, where, and what should be done, for instance, to mitigate that level of vulnerability. So we are working both from the region and also from northern Kenya in the ASAL areas to use simple tools that can deduce vulnerability from the level of or understanding about the sensitivity and adaptive capacity of communities to understand what then can be done to mitigate against certain elements of vulnerability, crime-related vulnerabilities that have been identified with the kind of work that we are supporting. We put some of this at county level for those of us who are Kenyans to generate county hazard maps that we share also with the authorities, and we hope that this information is going into the planning levels for example, into the county integrated CIDPs that the counties are generating for purposes of planning into the future. Seem to have a jam of my slides, but that's okay. The last but not least that we just want to emphasize is that partnerships are key. We see a lot of community involvement and community also to the level of our colleagues back in the villages being able to interpret and understand Earth observation data and probably use the same information for their own planning, like grazing blocks and where and how they are going to use the available forage and grazing resources. So I wish to stop here and just say we are available to answer questions that might come our way in terms of the use of Earth observation tools for development decision making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robinson. Let's move to the next presentation. And may I call upon Alphonse to make his presentation. You can keep your questions up to the end, then you'll get a chance to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Enoch. Good morning to you again. My name is Alphonse Gouja. I'm managing a project funded by USAID with technical support from the U.S. Forest Service, as well as support from the Center for International Forestry Research, the Nairobi office. And I'm glad to see Dr. Mwangi joining us in this discussion forum. I will pick up from where Robinson Mugo is left in terms of using some of the data sets that the Regional Center prepares, how we have been using some of those data sets in the work we're doing. And the work I'm going to talk about is part of a project called the Kenya Water Towers Climate Change Resilience Project. And this is This is an activity that's a collaboration. Fortunately, it looks like a collaboration between various agencies and institutions, as you can see on this slide. Our partnership, obviously, with support from the government of Kenya. Like I said, financial support from USAID and all the other agencies listed there have provided data sets and also part of the advisory group for this project. And really, the challenge that we've been trying to address in our work is we continue to have landscape degradation over the years, despite a lot of efforts that have been undertaken to kind of restore. How come we continue to have landscape degradation? And when you look at the Kenya situation, you find even landscape and environmental sector has some of the smallest budgets in terms of for conservation, while at the same time, I think a lot of people actually appreciate the value of landscapes towards even the economy of the countries. So this really has been the challenge we've been looking at, and the goal of the work we've been trying to do is how can we support decision-making? And in terms of supporting decision-making, there is need for information and data. So our program really has been to try and create and provide information and data that can support decision-making and drive, like for this conference, we're looking at landscape restoration. How can we put more resources towards landscape restoration? And that can only come from availability of information that can help in decision-making. So for the presentation I'm making today, I'm really concentrating on one component of this project, which is really to look at ecosystem services valuation. And as a tool to try and make communities, try and make people understand the value or what do people benefit from ecosystems. And with a value for that ecosystem, we can, like I said, be able to influence decision making. Again, this is a slide I have talked about earlier on. These 5 are really the 5 main components of the project we're working on to support decision making, to support data availability. We've been undertaking a climate change vulnerability assessment within the same ecosystem, the water tower ecosystems. And we have been doing an ecosystem services valuation. We are working with our partners to kind of put together a comprehensive monitoring framework that can help in the future to be able to make data available for decision making and use all that in terms of our building strategies. So like I said, in terms of ecosystem services valuation, this is the component we've been trying to work with communities. How can we work with communities to try and make them understand, put a value to what they benefit from their ecosystems, and through stakeholder meetings, ranking of ecosystems with communities, we come up with situations like this where we go into an ecosystem through a stakeholder meeting. We kind of, let's all put a value just from their own perspective. Which of the ecosystems are so critical to them? And you see, like from this diagram, where you find that water plays a critical role, and the Kenya water towers are really some of the main water sources for this country. Therefore, you find that when communities rank them very high, they also rank firewood as one of the key things. And now we have a challenge of landscape degradation, and landscape degradation in these same ecosystem is also facilitated or enhanced through firewood collection, through grazing in the forest. So how can we build systems where communities are able to understand, in as much as they are benefiting through the provisioning services that they benefit from the ecosystems, how can we enhance conservation? So this is the work we've been doing, and all the work we've been doing has really been in support of some of the main government of Kenya initiatives. When you look at the National Climate Change Action Plan that is currently being revised, it critically calls for undertaking vulnerability assessments in different ecosystems, and the water towers being very critical ecosystems. This is a component that is very important, and this is something that we have done through the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center based here in Nairobi. We've produced a vulnerability assessment for the ecosystems. We've been working in Mau, Cherangani, and Mount Elgon. These are the 3 water towers we've been working in, and we have a comprehensive report that details the vulnerability of these ecosystems to climate change in support of that government initiative. And then in terms of the ecosystem services valuation, the National Forest Program for Kenya 2016 to 2030 critically calls for undertaking ecosystem services valuation as a tool to inform decision making, as a tool that can be used at both the national level and the county governments. Like I said at the beginning, you find when you look at the budgeting in some of the, like my good understanding at the county level, you realize that the environment sector, the environment ministry usually has the smallest budget. But at the same time, most of these county governments do understand the value of these environments, but at the same time, these are areas where the budget is very limited, which really comes down to, do people really understand the value of this ecosystem? Do people really understand what can be an economic value of this ecosystem? And therefore, we realize with programs or activities that like we've undertaken to place a value on the water towers, like you look at the Mau, what is the benefit to the community in terms of money, monetary value that the community can benefit? Can this influence budgeting? Can this influence decision making? So I'll skip this slide. Like I mentioned, we're working in Mau, Cherangani, and Mount Elgon, and we've been using the total economic value approach to put a value based on provisioning services, firewood, water, timber, look at regulating services, how do the ecosystem help in controlling water quality, in controlling soil erosion, as well as climate control as a key component of that ecosystem services, as well as other non-use values that we can add to build up a true value of the economic contribution. And from the assessment that we have undertaken, like this work we have been undertaking it in close collaboration with the Kenya Forestry Research Institute. And for me, this is a very key figure when you look at, for the two ecosystems, the Mau and the Cherangani. After categorizing, quantifying the ecosystem services, you will find from this assessment that regulating services provide the biggest component to the value. You look at the provisioning services, they're fairly quite small compared to regulating service, which for me is key. I mean, when you look at communities, communities are really looking at the benefit we benefit from here is mostly in terms of provisioning services. But economically, the regulating services really contribute quite a huge component. And this is the paradigm that I think communities need to be made aware of, that besides the provisioning component that are key, there is also need to critically consider the issue of regulating services that we obtain from these ecosystems. So for me, this is really one of the key, very important outcomes from this assessment, that we have to put a focus also on the regulating services rather than just the provisioning services that communities really look at. And then, like I said, some of the key issues in terms of provisioning services. In Kenya right now, a key issue is in terms of land rights, in terms of ownership of land for the ecosystems that live in and around these water towers. For people to appreciate the value, there is need for establishment of that proper property rights that can be able to satisfy, or in a way that local communities or local members are able to appreciate the value of those ecosystems. And then that can also lead to a reduction in degradation of the ecosystems and even restoration activities, as long as people have full or a greater sense of ownership of the landscape. There's even an increased desire and push for that. And then the other key thing that for ecosystem services within the water towers, we're looking at agriculture. Communities in and around these ecosystems make their livelihoods from agriculture, while at the same time we are trying to push the conservation agenda. How can we develop that balance between livelihoods through agriculture and the conservation agenda? Even when we look at landscape restoration, that's a key question now. When we look at the so many millions of hectares that have been pledged for restoration, the bond challenge, where is that land going to come from? How are we going to balance agriculture production and landscape restoration? So that's also a very key aspect that we need a scientist to kind of develop more discussion around. And in Kenya right now, with conservation of the water towers, there's controversy in terms of the Pellis program, how that has resulted in, or how that has resulted in a further degradation of the landscape, with people pushing more towards growing of their crops without more focus also on conservation. So that linkage between agriculture and ecosystem conservation is really key. And I mean, I talked about this before. Regulating service from the assessment we've done for this project is really the key component of the total economic value of the water towers. Basically hinges around the regulating functions that these ecosystems provide. But this is information that not very many people appreciate at so many levels, from the local community even up to central government level. So there is need for concerted efforts, like I said, to push towards trying to focus and people understand regulating service. So from our assessment, one of the key things we are really recommending is At the county level, can we have an inclusion of economic valuation of ecosystem within county integrated development plans? Again, for me and for our project, it's really mainly geared towards influencing decision-making and budgeting. How can we use this ecosystem service evaluation to be able to ensure we have increased resource allocation towards conservation? And one of the key challenges you find working in Kenya in some of these ecosystems is the unavailability of data. A key recommendation from our work has really been we need to have effective monitoring system. And now with the data sets that RCMRD is generating, that is a tool that can be able to ensure that over time, rather than static ecosystem services valuation, we do some kind of a temporal assessments over time. So we have a better appreciation how the ecosystem services are changing over time. So there is need for developing effective and complete data sets for these ecosystems. And the issue of payment for ecosystem services cannot be overemphasized. How can we build these best? Again, for me, even when we build payment for ecosystem services programs, they have to be built on availability of data. We have to have an understanding of what are the ecosystem services that we can benefit. How can we quantify what are the values? And those are the precursors for good PES programs. So these are some of the key recommendations. And from our assessment, I mean, I've talked about most of this stuff. The issue of data availability, there's usually limited data, and focus should also be more on generating quantitative data that can inform ecosystem services. There's also that need to have a good understanding of the trade-offs between provisioning services and regulating services in the same ecosystems. And this, for me, is also a very key figure. Again, this is coming out from our climate change vulnerability assessment for the three ecosystems, the Mount, the Cherangani, and Mount Elgon, where you find over time for different RCPs that have been used in the modeling for this, you find that the vulnerability is increasing as we move into the future. So how can we develop and build programs that are able to combat or to be able to alleviate against this increased vulnerability of these ecosystems? This vulnerability is really looking at climate change, changing patterns in temperature and rainfall, how that is integrated to develop that vulnerability assessment. So looking at that map, you can see as we move into the future, in as much as we are talking about landscape restoration, we need to focus also to try and identify what are the key hotspots where vulnerability is going to be even much higher as we even implement landscape restoration activities. So, like I said, this is a product from the climate change vulnerability assessment for this project. And in conclusion, really, in as much as we want to value landscapes, value ecosystem, I think we will all agree that valuing for the sake of valuing without influencing policy is not going to make any difference. So we need to have communication and knowledge transfer with decision makers. In this case, I'm looking at county governments, I'm looking at central government. How can they make use of ecosystem services, valuation assessments like this in terms of decision making? While at the same time, we also appreciate that valuing ecosystem could also be a double-edged sword. The greater the value people see in that ecosystem, the more that ecosystem becomes under threat as people want to exploit what they can exploit, like in terms of looking at tree species that people can value high within an ecosystem. As long as you have put it out there that this is the value of these tree species, this is the value of the water that are extracting from this ecosystem, there's even a more concerted You can even expose that ecosystem even to higher degradation. So, I mean, this can even be a double-edged sword in terms of increased risk of that ecosystem to degradation. So these are some of the key things that are coming out of the assessments we've done. We feel that with valuation of ecosystems, people have a better appreciation, even when programs for landscape restoration are initiated and implemented on the ground, with people having that better appreciation of the value of the ecosystem, that can even further the cause and improve the implementation of landscape restoration activities. I think I will end it there and pass it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Alphonse. The next speaker is George. Please, welcome. Please keep your questions. I know you have many.
Yes, hello everyone. My name's George Miner. I work for the Nature Conservancy, Africa region, as the Fisheries Strategy Manager. But today I'm going to present more than fisheries. I'm going to present about the restoration opportunities in Kenya's rangelands through community conservancies. Just a little bit of background about what we do is that TNC, or the Nature Conservancy, our mission is to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends. This is by protecting plants, animals, and also working with communities that depend on these systems. And the area where we work across the globe, but to restrict myself to the focus of this forum, in Africa, we work in 7 countries, from West Africa in Gabon to Seychelles to Tanzania, South Africa, Zambia, and Namibia. And the landscape area where we work approximately covers about 71 million acres. And our priority landscape area covers, focuses on mainly various strategies, but the most important one is one that is focused on community-led conservation. And in this one, that is very important for landscape restoration, we work in northern rangelands of Kenya and in Tanzania, and also in Kafue landscape, and also in Namibia, and we also work with partners to establish institutions that help communities to network and increase their capacity. And how do we work? Our goal, especially with working with communities to restore landscape, our goal is that we aim to maintain habitat connectivity for people and nature, and by focusing on mainly 3 approaches. One, by supporting communities to secure their rights to the land and the resources that they live within. We also focus on building their capacity in terms of leadership and also ability to manage the resources, including wildlife and other natural resources, and also supporting them to build business enterprises that incentivize conservation, and eventually aiming to ensure that we have healthy African landscape areas. And so in Kenya, the areas that we work in, as I said, is northern rangelands of Kenya. That is in northern Kenya. We also work in the Upper Tana to manage the watershed. We also work with communities in the Mara ecosystem, and I'll talk more about that, and also work with the coastal communities in Kenya. And today we are lucky we have one of the community representatives who will be talking to us more about the work that they do in their community conservancy. So he will give us more details in terms of the work that they are doing on the ground. So I just wanted to mention a little bit about the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association. Is an association that has been supported by TNC and partners, including USAID. And KWCA is a good tool that is supporting communities, government, and other partners to improve landscape restoration, particularly by helping, serving as the voice of the communities that are protecting wildlife in areas that are outside government established protected areas. They also help in equipping conservancies with information and tools that are required to manage these landscapes where the wildlife and forest and where we have these other very important natural resources, and also helping in advancing policy that are supportive of the landscape restoration agenda. So here I'll give you a summary of some of the outcome from the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association from a report that they did in 2016. They are supporting 160 community conservancies that cover 6.36 million hectares of land, which represents 11% of Kenya's landmass, and they are found in 28 counties, and are divided into 13 regional entities. So 4 of these community conservancies are marine, that is they touch on the terrestrial side and also on the marine side. 76 are community owned, while 58 are private owned, and 26 are group conservancies, meaning that it's private landowners coming together to set their land for conservation purposes. And 8 of these conservancies are sanctuaries, meaning they are protecting some of the most endangered species like rhino and other species of wildlife like an antelope that is only found in some parts of the southern part of Garissa, which a community rep here will talk about. And 113 conservancies are registered under the KWCA. So Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association is a very good tool of helping the communities to network, to come together, building their capacity, helping them access tools like what we have seen presented here. And it's an association that if supported actively, can help communities advance their objectives of improving their livelihoods while also maintaining the balance between use and protection. And in terms of livelihoods, based on the KWCA status report, we found that 830,000 communities benefit from the community conservancies, with 4,800 being directly employed by these community institutions. And at the same time, these community conservancies are hosting about 84 tourism facilities that are bringing revenue to the community. And this is very important for ensuring sustainability of the community conservancies and ensuring that there is sustainable financing and they can be able to undertake their activities beyond donor projects. So the other part I would like to talk about is the Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association. It's an association that most of you know. Masai Mara, it's a very important ecosystem. 25% of Kenya's wildlife is found in these areas. There are 14 conservancies in that region, and there are about over 13,000 landowners who have come together to form these conservancies, and there are 39 camps that are helping generate income that is also benefiting the communities, with 274 community rangers employed by this association. And so this is another good example of how communities who own land, either private land owners, community land, and a group of landowners can come together to ensure that their habitat that wildlife depends on is connected and that communities are benefiting in terms of balancing the existence of wildlife and also benefiting in terms of having areas to graze their livestock. So the other kind of an association is a Northern Rangeland Trust, which is focused in the northern part of Kenya. It also covers an area of about 4.5 million hectares, supporting over 600,000 community members, covering an area of 11 counties, 35 community conservancies, and operating in an area that is prone to drought and conflict. And so the NRT, or Northern Rangeland Trust, is another avenue or another tool that is very useful if supported fully to achieve good habitats that are supporting people and nature. So I would like to kind of conclude here by presenting, talking about the challenges and opportunities that these kind of approaches or tools are facing, and which I would like to present to you here as for collaboration and for support. For communities to be able to achieve their objectives in terms of supporting livelihoods and protecting the nature that they depend on, it is very important that the institutions, that community institutions have strength in terms of capacity, leadership, and also in terms of management. Because without having a strong governance, the communities will not be able to manage the resources that they live within or that they depend on. It's also important for wildlife and resources that are in these areas to be secured and therefore community rangers and also supporting governments to improve their collaboration with communities is also very important, and therefore personnel, patrols, and enforcement is an important part of ensuring that these landscapes are properly protected. The other aspect is in terms of protecting the endangered species that are declining, and therefore it is very important to ensure that there is proper monitoring and surveys and use of science to inform conservation actions, and therefore tools like the ones that have been presented by Regional Center for Mapping are very useful in terms of ensuring that whatever conservation activities are done are informed by science. So the other point is that to ensure that there is sustainable financing, it is important to support communities to incubate businesses that incentivize them to conserve. If it is communities that are living with wildlife, they need to see the benefits for them to be able to conserve wildlife. For those who are living within forests, they need to see benefits of those forests. So it is very critical for all of us, stakeholders, to involve communities and work with them to help build these type of livelihood activities, like be it tourism, or those that are like in fisheries, or even artwork and kind of beadwork. So it is very important to have business enterprises that are incentivize conservation. So I would like to stop there by appreciating support of various partners who have provided funds and support to various institutions that are undertaking that kind of work, and notably the USA, Danida, and Government of Kenya, and other agencies. At this point, I will stop there and welcome a community member to maybe dive deep and so that we can hear also a voice from the community.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Noor Abdi Malim from a community conservancy in northeastern Kenya, Garissa County. The topic I want to talk about is the Rangeland Restoration, a case study in Shakbini Hirola Community Conservancy. Shakbini Hirola Community Conservancy is a community conservancy that was started the year 2007, and it is a home of the world's rarest and critically endangered antelope species called Hirola. Currently, the Hirola population is less than 450, and it's only found this part of Kenya. The conservancy was established to recover Hirola population and protect its natural range. You see the map there. The Kenya map, the spot there is where the conservancy is, and this bigger map is the Conservancy Map. The conservancy is owned by and managed by a Somali community, a pastoral Somali community called Abdallah Clan, and it is part of Garissa County. The area of the conservancy is 68,000 hectares, and you also have a Hirola Sanctuary, which is 35 kilometers square. And the conservancy is adjacent to Tana Primate Reserve and also Tana River. Our focus is to improve the livelihood of the community through conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. What we do, we uphold the bylaws of the Conservancy on the conservation and management of natural resources, and uphold the laws of the Kenya, e.g. Forest and Wildlife Acts, by promoting peace and good governance of the Conservancy. We use Conservancy to bring peace between neighboring communities. For example, in Shegbini, we are a pastoral community and we are neighboring with a farming community that is Pokomo from Tana River. So especially during the dry time is when the conflict comes between these two communities. So we use conservation as a tool to bring these two communities together. And also, we promote good governance of the conservancies through capacity buildings, forming the board, doing elections, democratic elections within the regions and villages, and training the elders to run and manage their resources. And for example, for Shegbini, for the last 2 years, we did an external audit, and the 35 conservancies that fall under NRT, Shegbini was the best conservancy in terms of the audit report in managing the donor fund. That is a good governance. We also use we use the conservancy to improve livelihood. The way I said, my community is a pastoral community, and they only depend their lives from livestock, and they were living with wildlife since immemorial. My community, they are not poachers. They respect wildlife and the natural resources that they have, and they believe living with wildlife will also promote their wealth and also make them wealthy and protect their livestock. So the more they have wildlife around them, they believe that the more livestock they will have. So they are not poachers by nature. Because of that, the Conservancy also uses to improve their livelihood by bringing, for example, we are a pastoral community, we are not educated much, and so we use some funds to give out bursaries to students from the pastoral community, especially girls and boys in the remote areas. We are living in an arid land. We also support the community in terms of providing water. Water is an issue in our area, so the Tana River is very near. Through the Conservancy, we get donors, we get funds from donors, and try to help the community get clean water. We also use the Conservancy to protect the rangeland and do rangeland restoration. Through rural conservation, we engage the community to understand the importance of rangeland and how they are supposed to do plant grazing, rangeland rehabilitation, clearing of the invasive species. And it is helping both the livestock and the wildlife, because rangeland is for wildlife and also for livestock. And the community understand that for them to survive and have more livestock, they need also to do rangeland management and work with the Conservancy when we are doing grazing plans and grazing bylaws. We also do wildlife security and environmental protection. We have rangers. We have rangers who do daily patrols in the Conservancy. And the Conservancy map, the way I showed you, we have blocks. These are blocks, and each block has locations. And the Conservancy rangers have a monthly plan where they visit and try to cover all the Conservancy area and see what is going on. So the way you see, we also prevent illegal logging and destruction of the forest and grass. That is the rangeland that we have. Especially it is a dry season grazing area. We set the bylaws and advise the community not to graze this area during the wet season. And they use it to graze during the dry season together with wildlife. These are our rangers. They are armed, and they do the patrols to protect the grassland and the forest. We have a rangeland rehabilitation program working with NRT. We do clearing of the invasive species that my friends were talking about. We have the acacia efficiency that brings bare land. So we try to clear those invasive species and do reseeding where it's doing great to improve the rangeland. We have wildlife data where we store the daily reports from the rangers, and which will give us to make a better decision in terms of protecting the environment and the wildlife security. Because we have a monthly data that will show us where the poachers are and the number of wildlife that were killed and the number of logging incidences that were happened within that month, and we strengthen and put our effort in those hotspot areas. We also work with the community, doing community awarenesses on the grazing plans and the work we do, and train them to understand the grazing and the work the Conservancy is undertaking. We also work with the stakeholders. We work with the county government, KWS, Kenya Forest Service, to improve our work. The other important species that we have is the white giraffe. I think you have heard of white giraffe in the media and the social medias. That white giraffe is found in our area, in Ishekbini, and we see it as also endangered because it's one female with a white calf also. So there are two in number, and they are found in Ishekbini. So we are trying to put more effort in also conserving these animals. These are the water supply that we support the community. So the actions taken to save Hirola from extinction. This Hirola, the way my colleague has said, it's an endangered antelope species, and it's only found in this part of Kenya. And the problem of Hirola started before even independence. So during that time, the conservationists that were there, they thought the problem of Hirola was the rangeland, the natural habitat, and they tried to do translocation to Savo East. They have taken 30 Hirola to Savo East. In 1971, Hirola have been legally protected from hunting in Kenya in 1971. In 1983 to 1985, drastic decline. 85 to 90% of Hirola were lost in their natural range. During that time, in Garissa County, there was a rinderpest outbreak that also affected our livestock. Most of our livestock died during that time, so those people who did research were relating that rinderpest might also affected Hirola. In 1996, the KWS formed the Hirola Task Force, was established in 1996. Also, the aerial survey that was done in 1996 counted 303 Hirola in the natural range, and 35 more Hirola were translocated to Savo. In 1996, also Hirola was reclassified as the sole representative of the genus Batricus, and they were classified. They were also put in the red list of the IUCN as a critically endangered species. During the 1996, the local community confronted the translocation, and they have seen that the translocation of this animal from its natural range is not a solution. And they went to the court, and court was put a court injunction. There was no more translocation. So this idea of community conservation came in from NRT. The community accepted that they conserve Hirola within the natural range. And Ishekbini was developed in the year 2007. After the Conservancy was developed, Hirola population was also going down because of the predators and the poachers. So the stakeholders, the Northern Rangeland Trust, KWS, and TNC met with the community and developed a proposal to have a free sanctuary, a predator-free sanctuary was constructed in the year 2012, and we put 48 rollers in the sanctuary. And currently inside the sanctuary we have 125 rollers. And the roller that was translocated to Savo East, there was a report done by Kenya Wildlife Service in 2017. Since 1963 to date, the roller in Savo East is between 60 to 70. While within 5 years, the sanctuary in Shekbini, the roller population rose from 48 to 125. The challenges that we are facing, limited funds for roller conservation and rangelands program in Shekbini. The roller conservation mainly depends donor funds. There is no support we get from the government. So today we ask the county government and national government to support community conservation in the country, because the community conservation that we have mainly depend donor funding. Relatively, we have poor infrastructure in terms of roads, network, and communication. The pastoral nature of the community inserts pressure on conservation through land sharing. And we are living in a desert area. Drought and famine affects the pastoral communities who derive their livelihood from livestock. Limited livelihood opportunities for the local community is also a challenge. These are our partners. Northern Rangeland Trust is our main partner. Since we started the Conservancy to date, we also work with Kenya Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy, and KWCA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now is your session to ask questions. We only have about 10 minutes before the end of the session. Can we start from this end? Any questions on this? Okay, that's.
Thank you for your presentations. Just a quick question about the rangers or scouts. The critics of this model of conservation are arguing that conservancies are arming community members. Is that not a security threat into the future when you have community members who are really not security agents but having guns for conservation at the community level? Thank you.
I think that's taken. Can we have another question? Okay.
Thank you. Felix, a student on conservation. One, the question goes to the Nature Conservancy. You are mentioning your actions, what you are doing is almost the same as NRT. It's like you are overlapping. Are you guys not doing the same thing? You know, covering northern Kenya and coastal region, which the NRT does. Need a clarification on that.
Another question before we move to this other end? Can we have those answered, and then we'll ask this way?
Yes, maybe I can go first. The question about the arming of rangers, community rangers. The community rangers are vetted by local community and government. They are given the Kenya Police reservist status. So they are part of the security system. So in case there is any danger that a certain community member may pose a security risk to an area or a community, the police are usually the ones that vet them and give them arms. But it's, as I said earlier, it's to ensure security for wildlife, but also for the community that they live within, because the government cannot be everywhere. So they are, the conservancies are under KWS, and so the mandate is by KWS and also by the national government. The second question is about overlapping work by the Nature Conservancy and partners such as Northern Rangeland Trust. Our work as TNC is to support partners. It is to facilitate partners. We work through partnerships. So we are here, I'm presenting this because the person who was supposed to be doing this talk could not make it, so I had to cover for him. So as TNC, we support partners, local communities and local NGOs, and also working with other international NGOs to achieve our objectives. That is very important.
I think we now move this side. Let's start with you, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Evelyn. I work for UN Habitat. I appreciate all the speakers and the presentation you've made. I want to echo the importance of looking at opportunities to mainstream livelihood activities within the ecosystem plans and the whole design. And I think the example that was shared in terms of the approach on quantifying and valuing ecosystem, I think for the towers in Mount Elgon and so forth was a good example. In terms of the MND system, to what extent you are involving the communities around this ecosystem, one, in participating in the actual data collection. I see, of course, there are systems like using of the NASA and maybe high technological initiatives that probably in terms of data collection, to what extent are the communities probably empowered to participate so that they can be able to relate with that data, and what has been the challenges around that? Also addressing the question of data ownership and accessibility of that data. Do you feel like as agencies working in this area, you are sharing this data across, or among yourselves in a way that can also be used adequately to influence decision making? Looking at data aspects within the tenure and the land issues, of course, there's a big challenge. And lastly, maybe address the aspect of gender issues and how that has been managed in your programming. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that's directed to Alphonse and Robinson. Okay, the next one.
My name is Polly Noyce, and I'm a trustee at Manor House Agricultural Center, where we teach small-scale farmers organic farming. I'm also a member of our local Water Resource Users Association, and also one of the youngest community forest associations in Kitale. And we would be interested to be able to share the data from satellite technology and the data crunching that's being done, so that we can also better monitor our water resources and our forest resources. And I'm wondering, where do we enter into that discussion with the scientists and the programmers who are able to process that information? Because we on the ground can give you more information, but we need the information from you so that we know where the lapses are.
Thank you. Next.
I hope. My name is Paul Ongugo from Kefri. I just have two issues. Maybe the first one, which is rather general. When the presenters talk of community, and then they talk of community conservancy, what are all these? Because how do they define community so that at the end you have a community conservancy? Because to me, most of the conservancies are either private or public. How do the communities start to own conservancies and things like that? My second comment is on this valuation. It's very interesting what you have come out with, particularly in the water towers, the difference between the provisioning and the service. In economics, service is more easily measured than provisioning functions. How did you manage to the extent that provisioning functions tend to be more important than service functions? And yet, in most cases, when I go in the rural areas and I walk through the forests, people are more concerned about what the forests provide. I mean, what they serve as humanity with, rather than, for example, issues like carbon sequestration, things like good health, and issues like that. As a citizen, I sometimes get confused about these things. I would want the presenters, you can clarify a bit more, so that as I walk through the forest, I'm more comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, it's clear. And then next.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Kimani, and I'm a recent high school graduate. First, I'd like to thank the presenters for the information they gave us. When the representative from the Nature Conservancy was speaking, you talked about how one of your aims is to create awareness among the communities about the importance of the ecosystems they're living in. That way they'll contribute more. My main question is, if we look at today's society, a lot of people are moving from, especially the youth, they're moving from rural areas to urban areas, and communities that are left in rural areas are becoming smaller as years pass by. So are there any means or are there any initiatives you guys are taking to inform also the people outside those ecosystems about the value and the importance of the ecosystems and the value of their own contribution, even though they're not within that ecosystem, to participate? And if you have been taking such initiatives, what are they and how successful have they been? Thank you.
I think let's have the last one so that we answer that before we come to this end.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Judith Okello from the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute based in Mombasa. Actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask is what the lady has just asked, but then one more. How do you recruit the members in these conservancies? What are the criteria that you use for defining the members? Thank you.
Very much. We will have, I think each one of you take a go. I'll call upon Robinson to start, and then Alphonse, and then the rest. Thank you.
Respond to the questions on data access and gender, and the access to the data from our friend in Kitas.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions, and I'll respond to the issues of the challenges on the data. As my colleague presented on the collection of data, for example, using a mobile app to collect data on the occurrence of invasive species, we do have partnerships with the institutions that are working in those conservancies. For example, the Northern Rangelands Trust and the county governments, and also from National Disaster Management Authority. And what we do is they already have, or some of them already had, operations on the ground to collect data. So they already have their own mechanisms of safeguarding the data. So what we come in to do is to improve the methodology of improving that data, the efficiency, ensuring that as they walk around, as they do their monitoring operations, they are able to simply use their mobile phones to pick the location of the occurrence of the invasive species or and other important aspects, and that data is sent to our servers and we are able to generate the maps. So in our technology is basically to improve the efficiency and the accuracy of that data. And also the lady who asked about the availability of the satellite data in the processing, we do have partnerships and we always welcome new ones. Robinson presented on one of our approaches that we use as SAVIR, and that's the service planning approach. And what we usually do is do needs assessments and stakeholder engagements where we try to understand their needs in a more in-depth manner so that we are able to address the specific needs and service them without necessarily duplicating what is already happening or being done by others, and at the same time ensuring that the impact is positive and of course also value for the resources that are put in it. So what I would say is that at RCMRD, we do have a lot of satellite data, some of it that we receive directly from the satellite. For example, the MODIS data, we have a receiver at our offices, and it's free. We usually disseminate that. Those who are interested can liaise with us. And we also get other data from NASA and other partners. And for the processing within our partnerships, we usually welcome partnerships in our existing operations and projects. And we also do what we call, if people are interested, they can, for example, liaise with us. We do take projects at very reasonable rates because RCMRD is a non-profit institution. For our ongoing work and where we identify value for our ongoing work, and increasing of uptake of our already existing services, we are able to do that through support from USAID, which supports SAVIR. So we would welcome more discussions on this and see how we can assist. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll just highlight on two issues. In terms of data sharing, data availability, even data collection. Like I mentioned during my presentation, one of the key things we found out when we're doing these assessments for even the ecosystem services valuation and the climate change vulnerability is the unavailability of data, or where the data is available. It's very scarce. You look at basic discharge data from some of the watersheds we're working in where there are very big data gaps because of malfunctioning equipment or because there's nobody to record the stage data for water level, for discharge. So that's really one of the key recommendations that we've put in there, that there's really need for concerted efforts towards generation of high resolution spatial and temporary data sets that can inform these assessments. And that's a key, another component of the work we are working to develop a monitoring framework. I wish my friend Jamlek Ndambiri was around to talk about, I think you can comment on monitoring framework and generation of good quality data, what we're working on at some stage. So that's I'll let you talk about that maybe later on once I finish. So that's what I can say about data. And in terms of community participation in data collection, this is also an area we have been trying to focus on. And I know one of our partners, C4, they've got a project going on in Mau where they are working with communities capacity building communities to be able to collect water level data, water quality data, as a way for them to appreciate the value and utility of that data through citizen science. And this is really one of the things we are really trying to push. How can we continue to engage communities through citizen science as a way of raising awareness in terms of value and utility of data? So these are very critical items. And then Dr. Ongugo, in terms of regulating and provisioning services, well, it is, I mean, we all will appreciate that the local community, when they look at the forest, what they see is, I can pick this tree for fencing poles, for timber, for whatever purpose. That's what they see. That's the value they asset to that. I mean, there's not that much appreciation in terms of that regulating service. And what we do in terms of quantifying that, let's look, just looking at water quality. For this work, we're just looking at the water utility company in Kericho is supplying water to the citizens. For a particular year, how much do they use to purify the water? And that depends on the sediment load in the water. Now, take out the forest, take out the trees, that impacts on the sediment load, and that impacts on how much the same company is going to now utilize in terms of water purification. So ecosystem conservation in terms of reducing soil erosion, in terms of reducing sediment load, how that translates now to the value that, or to the cost that water utility company is using in terms of purifying that water, is what we are using to kind of place a value to that ecosystem service. And this is what we've been doing to even issues like carbon storage. Already there are standard values asserted to carbon, and we can have an estimate of the carbon stock of any ecosystem, and that's how we put a value. And when you look at comparing the total value from the regulating service, you find it's much, much higher than the provisioning, where it's just collecting water, it's just collecting firewood, it's just making charcoal. So that's how we've been trying to put a value, and which shows this big difference between provisioning and regulating service. I think those are the main questions, unless if there's something else I've left out. Thanks.
Well, thank you for those very good questions about community conservancies. I should have done a better job in terms of defining what a community conservancy is. Community conservancies are now recognized under the new Wildlife and Management Act of 2013, and they are defined as land designated by a community or a private landowner or groups of landowners or a corporate body for the purposes of wildlife conservation and other compatible uses. So that is definition as per the law. So a conservancy can therefore be established on either on private land or community land, and is managed for a broad range of land uses. So the term conservancy also refers to an institution that is set up to manage such land. So a conservancy is, community conservancy is just one form of devolved system of devolving management of natural resources, especially wildlife, to the community, equivalent to community forest association for forest or fisheries beach management units in fisheries. So it's well anchored under legislation. So the next question regarding the awareness to the community to maybe prevent rural to urban migration. As TNC, as I said earlier, one of our strategies is to ensure that there is a good capacity and leadership to manage natural resources. So this focuses not only to the practitioners, but also to the community, so that they can be able to undertake management functions for their resources. For example, the way Ahmed is doing in terms of assisting his community to manage landscape that within their area. So we support the community to, in terms of capacity building, focusing on communities and also institutions at school, but not doing it directly, but partnering with institutions and other partners to do it on our behalf as TNC. So we help in fundraising, and where support is needed in terms of technical support, we borrow that from our pool of experts from around the world to support the communities. And in terms of the other strategies, in terms of creating sustainable benefits, in terms of livelihoods. So by building or incubating businesses within the community, this is supposed to support the local community, invest, generate income within, and possibly prevent the rural to urban migration. But this is very difficult, and TNC and the partners that we work with, we cannot achieve these alone. And this is why I said in my last slide, it's a call for partnership, it's a call for support in terms of fundraising, technical support, to help these communities incubate businesses that will help them improve livelihood and income, and then ultimately prevent them from or discourage them from moving to towns, but invest in their areas where they come from.
Thank you very much.
The question on how communities join the conservancies, I will leave it to the Ahmed.
Thank you. On the issue of recruiting the rangers, the conservancy, for example, in case of Ishagbini, for the case of Ishagbini, the conservancy owned by 3 locations. That is called Hara, Kotile, and Korisa location. So the recruitment comes from the members of the community. We have board members. The board inform the community that we want to employ rangers. So those interested will come, and the KWS do the vettings, who fits to be a ranger. After we recruit rangers, they are taken to Manyani, the Kenya Wildlife Institute Training Institute, to get how to work with the wildlife, how to do data collection and monitoring. And then later, they are vetted by the Kenya Police to get the status of National Police Reserve. So the firearms that the rangers have is not a private one, it is owned by the government of Kenya. So our rangers are recognized by the government of Kenya as a National Police Reserve. Thank you.
It's your lunch hour. Maybe I should give Ndambiri 2 minutes to comment about data. And then if there is any burning question, maybe 1 or 2 before we go for lunch. Ndambiri, please.
Thank you, Enoch. And again, also thank you, Alphonse. Sorry I came late. And maybe just what I want to say, because it's also lunch hour, I don't want to spend a lot of time, is really the works that we are doing jointly with the USAID, CIFO together with the ministry and Kenya Forest Service, in terms of developing a monitoring system that would actually be able to inform in terms of how is our landscape, especially the water towers of this country, how are they behaving in terms of healthiness and vitality. As Alphonse has alluded, we are already in such a great challenge in terms of critical data that can actually be able to be inputted into the system. Kenya Forest Service, we have already developed a system that is actually able to capture both the spatial and the statistical data that can help inform on how the forest ecosystems are behaving. And as this work continues, other partners are coming on board, and we have brought on board now the Kenya Water Towers, who are, again, very much interested in assessing the healthiness and vitality of the Kenya's forest water towers. I think this is a discussion we can continue further, but now that is Ranch Hour, we may not go very far in this. But again, thank you very much, Enoch.
Thank you very much. Dambiri will be available at lunch hour for discussion, and the whole of this team, I think, will avail themselves if you have an extra question. But if you have a burning one, I can see.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel Jaffet. I'm working with the Waterland International. I have just one question. It's very simple, but I'm a bit concerned with issues on evaluation of ecosystem services, particularly on carbon issues. If you estimate carbon, you need allometric model, which varies according to vegetations. So if you can use another model from another vegetation, it means that your result is wrong. So what type of vegetation of allometric model you used in your estimations, especially in Mau? But also the value of carbon you obtained, and maybe an initiative to translate those value to real money, I mean on carbon sharing. Thank you.
I refer you to Carefree for the modeling they did in terms of the carbon. I can give you a contact. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The purpose for this presentation was to encourage you people from other institutions so that you can join this team in conserving these landscapes. And I want to thank you for sticking with us and the keen listening. You have something? Okay. And with that, I think we come to the end of this session. We can thank the team for a good work they have done with a clap.